Good evening, councillors and council officers. It's 18:59. So I'll start the meeting of the licensing committee. I'm Councillor Collins, and I'm chair of this licensing committee. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be live streamed via the council's YouTube channel. So I ask the members and officers in the council chamber to use their microphone when speaking. Could I ask, please, members to introduce themselves, starting with the members in the council chamber, then those starting off. Councillor Allen.
Councillor John Allen, Tilbury St Chad's Ward.
Councillor Shane Ralph, Stamford East and Crom Town.
Sorry.
Councillor Fraser Massey, East Tilbury Ward.
Councillor Maney.
Try again.
Councillor Summons.
That was my fault.
Councillor Anderson.
Councillor Abbas.
Councillor Steve Lydiard.
Councillor Tony Fish.
And I understand, Councillor Baker. Yes, Councillor Baker. Councillor Baker there, please.
Oh, sorry, did you say Councillor Baker?
That's correct.
Yeah, obviously I'm here, yes. Cheers, Chair.
Councillor Redsell, are you with us?
Evening.
Councillor Redsell, can you hear us, please?
Can you hear me?
Okay, well, we have Councillor Redsell here as well, but we can't quite hear her yet. It's like the Eurovision Song Contest, isn't it? We'll carry on anyway, and hopefully Councillor Redsell will be able to tie in with us shortly. Apologies for absence. I've not received any apologies for absence. Can I have any apologies been received since we printed this?
Thank you, Chair. No, I haven't received any.
Great, okay. Any apologies? Okay. I move, next item is item 2, minutes. I move that the minutes of the licensing committee meeting held on the 5th of February 2020 be approved as correct record. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes, first of all? So can we take it they're approved?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Yeah.
Agreed.
The minutes are approved. Item 3. I have not agreed to any items of urgent business this evening, so we can move on to item 4. Declarations of interest. Item 4. Does anyone wish to declare a declaration of interest, please? Anyone joining us virtually like to declare any items of interest?
No.
Please? Councillor Lydiard.
No, nothing of interest to me.
Councillor Fish. Any items of interest?
No, I don't have any items of to declare.
Take that as a no. Baker, do you have any items of interest?
No, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Redsell, can you hear us yet? Do you have any items of interest? We now move on to item 5, review of the Licensing Act 2003. We have here. Can I ask Paul Adams to introduce the report, please?
Chair. Just a brief report. The council has a statement of licensing policy in relation to its functions under the Licensing Act 2003. This policy should be reviewed every 5 years. This policy was actually due to be renewed last year, but because of work commitments, it's been delayed by a year. The reason for bringing a report to you tonight is in the sort of standard way. We as officers have been through the policy and have updated it to sort of keep pace with all the changes to the Licensing Act since the last revision. The main areas that have been reviewed are the inclusion of the Home Office as a responsible authority, and which at that time introduced the right to work checks that are carried out under the Licensing Act. And it's also, we've just reviewed all the application procedures which form part of the appendices. Other than that, there is no real update to the policy. We've had a good go through it as officers, and we feel that it reflects the sort of current position, and certainly the applications and sort of the dynamics of the authority as it stands. The proposal is that this will now go out to public consultation, subject to any input from the licensing committee tonight. And should there be any response to the consultation, and at the last consultation there was not any sort of response that needed any consideration, we'll bring back that response to this committee for consideration. If there's people raise points around the policy, we'll bring that here for consideration before referral to council for adoption. But if there's no things to consider in response to the consultation, the matter will get referred straight on to full committee, unless you particularly want to see it back here for any reason. So the matter will go out to consultation. Consultation will last usually between 6 and 8 weeks. There might be a slight delay in the consultation going out, in as much as it's sort of the policy at the moment. There is a sort of pause on consultations during this time. But as soon as we can get it out for consultation, we'll do so, and then bring it back through this committee. I mean, there hasn't been sort of a large volume of applications under the Licensing Act in the last few years that have come to this committee, and the policy, has sort of fared well in relation to the applications that we've seen. So, we don't feel that at this stage there's necessarily any reason to make any changes, but happy to seek the views of councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Just before I throw it out to the rest of the members for questions, I've just got one question I'd like to ask, and that applies to Appendix 4 application process, electronic applications. And we were talking about here in the first paragraph, EU Service Directive, and is intended to develop a single market for services by breaking down barriers, etc., etc. Post-Brexit, do we have any indication how that may change, please?
I mean, the European Service Directive basically requires us to make available online applications. We have online applications through a gov.uk system, so for us, from a business case point of view, it's more efficient for us to process those electronically anyway. So our preference will be to stay with electronic. I see no reason for that to change with any impact of
Chair, can anybody hear us?
I can
I
hear you.
can.
Yeah, sorry, we're not getting any sound at all. I don't know if anybody else is experiencing that.
No, I can't hear the chamber.
No, not
I
at
can
all.
hear you, Joy, but not the mayor, not the
No.
chair.
No, I can't hear a thing. Don't seem to be working as well within the chamber, does it?
Someone's probably
Muted.
turned off the mic.
Yeah. We'll just have a meeting with the three of us.
Four of us, I can see you all. Steve, is that you there? Something ain't right here, Jim. It's okay. But, can't hear anything now. See, all I can see is Councillor Fish, Councillor Redsill, and Councillor Lillian.
Yeah.
Technical hitch.
Done.
See the chamber again. What's going on here?
Can you hear me, Steve?
Press CB.
Yeah, what?
What's it say?
Just pin Roy's hand, put me on. Is that you, Steve?
It is.
Steve?
What's happening?
I've got no idea. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see you, Joy.
Okay. We can't have a meeting like this, can we?
No, it sounds a bit daft, doesn't it?
Yeah, stupid, isn't it?
I hope this isn't being recorded. Going out to the
Well,
public.
Not saying anything that we wouldn't
Come
say
again.
normally.
Shall I press
Yeah.
that? Yeah, press that.
It's camera.
We'll do that.
Press the mic.
Oh, I don't know why it cuts off.
There's nowhere we can ring, is there?
You're muted. You're unmuted. Press camera.
How are you getting on, Tony?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same. I can hear you. I can't hear the chamber. Can we not send a message? If we send a message, who?
Can you hear me, Joy?
I mean, it sort of sets out under, you know, I think you referred to it earlier on page 18 around enforcement, you know, sort of our general approach in relation to that. the enforcement tools are set within the legislation, so we don't necessarily need to recreate those within our policy. And those tools will and do change, you know, from time to time. So, you know, we could list all the options that are open to us, but we're only going to recreate what was within the legislation anyway. You know, I could look at that and see if we can incorporate some additional information within that section. But, you know, the risk is, you know, if you put a list in there of the things we can do, things that get taken away or things that get added. As I say, it is all set out within the legislation anyway. Thank you.
I thought there was going to be another question there, Councillor Evans. Anyone else in the chamber would like to ask a question? No? Okay, I'll put it over to the Ocean attendants.
Try talking then.
No questions,
Sorry,
Chair.
Councillor Laney.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, just a minor observation. At 3.1 of the report, it says the current policy expired in January 2014.
Yeah, no, apologies. I picked that up myself. It's a typo.
Yeah. The question I've got, of the 4 licensing objectives, some might argue that the most important one is the protection of children from harm. Can you do we still carry out test purchasing, and if so, how frequently do we carry that out?
Test purchasing is something that's led by trading standards as a responsible authority, so it's not the sort of direct responsibility of the licensing authority, which is, you know, me basically. The test purchasing, I know, is carried out by trading standards on an intelligence led. So, you know, a number of years ago, they used to just go out and randomly select premises and test. Whereas now they'll only, and it's sort of part of their enforcement, can call that they'll only respond to intelligence around it. So where they get reports of underage sales or intel around it, they do that. I know that there has been some test purchasing undertaken, and they also do test purchasing around sort of sale of tobacco and other products, knives, etc. If you know, even though alcohol, tobacco and knives are not a product that is licensable, they can still take action against the license if a shop that, you know, was licensed to sell alcohol was also selling cigarettes to underage children. So I would have to ask trading standards the details around what they've done recently, but I know they have done some, but it is less because it is very much intelligence based.
Any further questions in the chamber? Councillor Manning?
Just a personal observation, really, Chair. I'm not sure whether it's something we as a committee might want to return to at a later stage, but on a personal note, I'm slightly disappointed to hear that test purchasing is now done. I understand it is trading standards and not your team, but I'm slightly disappointed that it's intelligence led now rather than as a matter of course and with premises randomly selected, because it always was. And I think that's the best way to police underage sales. I think I'm just slightly disappointed. We now wait for complaints before we send in test purchasing. I think it's one of the options that is available to us and one of the best ways to basically make sure not just public, so off licenses are in their obligations. I know when I was chair that many of the reviews we had were triggered because trading standards had carried out an operation and found them to be making underage sales. So just a personal comment. I hope it's something we can look at in the future. I think we should do it as a matter of course and not wait for complaints.
Thank you, Councillor Laney. It's a very good point, and I'll certainly take that up. Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of complaints being received for such sales to underage children, whether it be alcohol, fags, knives, as you mentioned, can we get the data on that of how many we've had just recently?
Yeah, again, as I say, I mean, that is something that is led by trading standards. I'm sure, and we all sit within public protection. You know, that information will be within our systems and be provided by trading standards in relation to that.
Yeah, if that could be reported back to the committee, that would be appreciated, I'm sure.
Okay, I'll pass that to the trading standards manager.
Any more questions from the chamber before I take it over the vote? Yeah, no? I do have one question. I have a number of questions, but I think not of the night. But I do have one question for you again, Paul. This is about the provision of effective CCTV in and around premises on page 23. Are we looking at insisting that the cameras have facial recognition software?
I think certainly with licensing, every application needs to be judged on its own merits. I think what we're suggesting here is that there's provision of effective CCTV in and around the system that is installed, you know, with regard to the type of premises that it's going into. Some of those CCTV systems are very can be expensive. And quite be, there's a lot for people to put in. So I think certainly where the need arises, it would be something that the police would be pushing for. As a licensing authority, it would be difficult to put into a policy to say we require every premises to have it, because you should only apply a condition where it's necessary for the promotion of licensing objectives. But certainly it does talk about provision of effective CCTV. That's what we'd expect to see. And when they submit their application in their operating schedule, they should set out what their proposals are around CCTV. Most of them, the police have got a standard, a sort of example condition that they ask for quite often, and it does ask for certain cameras in certain locations. I can't remember the wording of it off the top of my head, but we tend to see it applied where appropriate in a standard format by Essex Police, and they do keep that up to date fairly regularly.
Okay, thank you. We nearly got away. Councillor Mayne, you have a question?
Yeah, well, I didn't think it was appropriate actually to bring this up under this item, but because Councillor Abbas has touched on enforcement and unlicensed events and that kind of thing, I just wanted to probe that a bit more, because we've seen in London the so-called pop-up parties that have occurred recently. There was a report, I think on Saturday, there was an unlicensed street party in Caspian Way in Purfleet. It's been put to me, it's not been corroborated, but it's been put to me that it was a Black Lives Matter mob who basically took over the street and closed it down and had a street party for about 5 hours. Certainly I've seen some email complaints about that to the local MP. I know primarily that's a matter for the police to deal with, but us as an authority, obviously it's not something we can be blind to. In terms of our preparedness and ability to deal with these kind of things, what mechanisms have we got? How can people contact us and report those kind of things to us when they happen? Because that one of the complaints was that when this happened, people didn't really know who to go to. So is that kind of on our radar, if you like? I mean, if it's happened once, if I say the Black Lives Matter rabble are looking at Thurrock as the next come-to place for these kind of things, what is that on our radar? Well, I know you can't give it an answer tonight because it's a new phenomenon. You can't say yes, we'll do this, but is it something we're conscious of, and is it something we know we need to prepare for or might need to prepare for?
I think to provide assurance, really, I know it's either this week or last week. Sorry, every week seems to be blurred into one at the moment, but we have had communication around the council, around officers that might have some involvement around that, and around the sort of phenomenon of these pop-up parties, and there seems to be a growing thing where people are hiring out Airbnbs for large houses, and then sort of large parties, partaking in it. So it's something that, as an authority, we're aware of, and we are, there's this cooperation with colleagues at Essex Police and other agencies around these. Predominantly responding to something that's happening, live would fall to the responsibility of the police. The police have the powers to close these events. you know, as a licensing authority, we've got no immediate closure powers. We deal with the aftermath, so we would review the license, we would take action, via a prosecution. You know, we haven't got the resources to go wading into a party and demanding that they stop. The police struggle to find those resources at times, I'm sure. But, you know, I'd say that is something that, you know, in the last couple of weeks has been discussed amongst officers around the councils. There's been a number of things that have gone on across Essex that have brought that to the forefront. So, yeah, it's something that we're aware of, that considerations have been given around how we would respond to it. And we have seen, I think Bellhurst Woods, there's been the odd occasion that a rave or similar has, taken place. Where we've been aware of that in the beginning, we've done some work with the police to obviously try and make contact with the organisers, and we basically give them warning if it does go ahead, you know, they're going to be liable for prosecution. That has been effective on some occasions. So yeah, I mean, certainly from a licensing authority point of view, we've got no sort of out of hours ability to respond to it or you know, powers to really deal with it. But you know, we would certainly could deal with the aftermath afterwards. And you know, the Essex Police are the ones that have access to the powers. There is some, I'm straying slightly out of my area of expertise, but under sort of from the noise team, from the Brunswick Health point of view, they have some sort of closure powers as well in relation to noise nuisance and things like that. But again, that would be something that you know, they've got an out of hours service. It's a limited out of hours service, and I'm sure through our emergency planning, you know, bronze, silver, gold command sort of thing. If it was that significant, it would filter through to the right officers anyway. But yeah, I mean, that's where we are with that.
Okay. Any more questions before we move virtually? Councillor Allen?
Just a clarification on Councillor Manning's. Obviously,
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of enforcement, regarding noise disturbance and mainly down to music noise disturbance. Now, I understand that enforcement are only available at weekends for such disturbances, maybe after, I do believe, 9 PM at night. So touching on a licensing point of view, how do you determine how many people make an unlicensed gathering as such? What you can enforce?
Certainly, in relation to that, it's not in relation to the number of people. It's around the activity that is taking place. So, and under the Licensing Act, you know, there are a number of licensable activities: regulated entertainment, which is a long list of things that was covered, sale of alcohol, provision of late night refreshment. So if any of those activities are taking place, then it's your thing. Some of those activities, predominantly the regulated entertainment, have to be carried out in front of an audience, but that audience can be a member of one person or 100,000 people. So it's quite wide reaching.
So it could effectively be in a residential area. That's what I'm saying, and not. I know you mentioned the Bellis Woods and
yeah, I mean, a license can be any premises, and that premises doesn't have to be a physical building. It can be a piece of land, it can be a piece of grass, and you can define that area however you like. So, you know, someone could on a plan draw a square 5 metres by 5 metres and ask for a license on that, you know, within reason.
Can I come back on that, Chair?
You want to come back?
Sorry, in terms of you've already suggested that the police can go and shut these down, but as I know, and probably you know, in all honesty, police prioritise the way that they police, and that would probably come in as a very low priority for them, and would receive no action from them. So effectively, you know, that disturbance or the rave, whatever you want to call it, wouldn't effectively be shut down quickly.
It's very difficult to answer that, but you know, as I say, it's easy to give an answer for a case-specific question. Generally, the police, again, it's, you know, not an area of my expertise, but generally the police will risk assess every situation. And you know, sometimes, and I've been involved with premises before, licensed premises, where the decision's been made, it's actually safer to allow things to continue and police it from the outside than it is to try and stop it and deal with it that way. that would be a decision by the police. I think it would be certainly a risk assessment that they would carry out, based on the resources that they've got available at that time and what else is going on, across the county. So, yeah, I think that's all I can comment on that.
Councillor Evans?
I think there are a lot of confusions on these enforcement, actions what we can take. I know you have explained this is already in legislation, but I think if you can add a link into these consultations, obviously this is not a question and answer session. This will go into consultation, then it will come back to us, So if you can add something on these enforcement actions, I think it would clarify. And the second point is not just a comment on Councillor Manny's. I don't think so. Linking a particular movement to any unauthorized kind of event which happened in Purfleet is appropriate at this stage. I am aware of this and I reported this to police. So obviously I wouldn't comment, the matter is being investigated.
Councillor Evans. Anyone else? Okay. How are we getting on with communications with our virtual team, please? Thank you. Councillor Lydiard, you have a question? Could you unmute, please, Councillor?
I'm not now. I've just unmuted myself.
And again. Hello, Councillor Lydiard, we can't hear you. Are you muted, please?
I am now, yes. Can you hear me?
Councillor Lydiard, could you ask the question, please? Could you ask the question, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Sorry, what was the original question?
Could you ask the question that you wanted to ask, please?
No, I don't have a question. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry. Councillor Fish, I understand you have a question, please.
No, I put my hand up because I wanted to let the chair know that we weren't able to hear listening remotely, but we can hear now. So I've put my hand down, actually.
Okay. Sorry about that, Councillor Fish. Anyone else, please? From the virtual meeting, I mean. Okay, I think we've exhausted the questions on this particular item, so we're going to move on to whether we agree with the recommendations outlined within this report. Are we agreed in the chamber?
All agreed.
Okay, and are we agreed with the virtual people attending the meeting virtually, please? Are you agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. We'll take that as agreed. We'll move on to the next item, item 6, review of the Gambling Act.
Agreed.
2005, Statement of Principles. Once again, can I ask Paul Adams to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is a report bringing the Gambling Act Statement of Principles, which is very similar to the previous policy, but this looks around applications around the Gambling Act 2005. Again, this was due for renewal last year. It's coming forward this year for renewal now. In principle, they should be reviewed every 5 years. Again, it's a draft review. Again, there's not been many changes, and we see a lot less activity around gambling applications within the borough than we certainly do with the Licensing Act. There's been some changes around incidental non-commercial lotteries made by a slight amendment to that. That's a technical thing. There was an update to the travelling fairs permitted activities and what they can provide. I think probably the biggest change, which although it's a very small change within the policy, was around the fixed odds betting terminals in betting shops, where the stake went from £10, a maximum of £10, all the way down to a maximum of £2 at any one time. Or it was a maximum of £100 they could stake at any one time. It got reduced back down to £2. And that was quite highly publicised within the press. And we've also included in there details around what's called a local area profile, which is something that if we get applications for gambling premises, they should carry out risk assessments. And the local area profile basically just gives them some information around the profile of Thurrock, so they can look at where they're looking to site a betting shop establishment, and it will give them information as to what sort of premises are around them, schools, are there any sort of healthcare facilities, and facilities that might that actually be susceptible to gambling addiction and things like that. So that's the real change. It's a much smaller change than even with the Licensing Act. Generally, gambling applications are very minimal, and in fact we've seen the closure of a number of betting shops this year across the borough, which is reflected nationally, just because it's partly a response to that change to the fixed of betting terminal change. So I think, Chair, as before, this will go out to consultation. It's come before you tonight, just for consideration and then any comments and questions, really. And it will follow the same process. We'll go out to consultation. If there's no comment, straight through to full council. If there is comment that needs, consideration, we'll bring it back here for consideration first.
Thank you, Paul. Before I actually put this out to the chamber for questions, I'd like to ask a question. This relates on page 28, and it's section 29.1, and it's about training covering how staff would deal with unsupervised, very young children being on the premises, and children causing perceived problems on and around the premises, and suspected truant children. My concern is they could also be easily victims of child sexual exploitation. Can you give us an indication of what sort of training we're expecting or giving people who should be running these premises, please?
So this is not about us providing the training. This is obviously encouraging betting premises, gambling establishments to provide training themselves. We do carry out inspections of gambling premises on a infrequent basis, and part of what we actually look at is the training that they provide and the sort of systems they have in place to protect the vulnerable, to protect, guard against, protection of children, etc. I would say that pretty much all of the establishments that we have got very good, very strong sort of training around this. It's something that as a sector they do invest a lot of money and time in, and they all develop their own in-house products. The idea of this policy is obviously to set out that we expect them to be looking at these areas, and most, if not all, will cover these areas. They also cover things like money laundering and problem gambling, and they're the sort of big key areas that they look at, child protection.
Just to follow up on that, do you have any minimums of we would expect, minimum requirements in the way of training, and that we should insist on?
I mean, it's something that we're not the only authority in relation to this. The Gambling Commission are quite leaders in this sector, and they do a lot of work around sort of setting the tone for sort of training and policy, etc., on a national level. We locally wouldn't dictate necessarily the actual content of the training itself. There's a lot of trade body associations as well that provide all of this, and say it is quite a heavily regulated, quite a sort of well coordinated industry. And there are fewer and fewer independents that don't have the sort of support and resources of these sort of really large companies behind them. So I say, you know, we don't set that tone of that. That's something that's more led by the Gambling Commission. We have a link officer with the Gambling Commission, and we liaise with them, you know, as and where necessary, really. So.
Thank you, Paul. I'll now put other questions. I'll start with at the back with Councillor Allen, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just in regards to that, with on the children matter, I think the big question should be: should children be allowed in gambling? You know, gambling places. I mean, does this not encourage them at a young age to gamble? That would be, I think, the big question: whether they should be in them gambling establishments at all.
I think generally most establishments that are covered by the Gambling Act, children are excluded from that. So betting shops, casinos, and the sort of the more high-end stuff. Obviously, it does cover things like family entertainment centres, and that's the sort of thing, you know, the coin machines you see at the seaside. It does cover, you know, fruit machines in pubs, and that side of it. So areas where children are exposed to that. But within that, certainly for things like family entertainment centres, you know, there's limits on the stakes and the prizes. You know, at the end of the day, that is a separate debate as to whether they should be exposed to gambling in any way, shape or form. But, you know, we have the Gambling Act. The Gambling Act enables that, and that's been a national consideration. It's not problem gambling for children. It's certainly something that is not very apparent within the borough. I'm not suggesting that you know, it isn't happening, but it's not something that's very apparent. Problem gambling itself obviously is an issue more with the adults, as it is, you know, across sort of the nationwide. But we haven't necessarily got a specific issue around children that we are aware of.
Sorry, Councillor Ralph, please.
Hiya, you did sort of touch on it a little bit earlier regarding betting premises. So if we look at, say, Coram Town Centre, we did have 4 betting shops very close together in the space of like 60, 70 yards. We're now gone down to 3. You said that we look at the community impact on what a betting shop would have or betting facility in the local area would be. Do you think going forward that would be less likely to happen, that you'd get 4 in a small town centre?
I mean, there was a change to the planning, and again, I'm not a planning expert at all, but there was a change to the class use of premises, which basically allowed more premises to be used as betting shops. At that point in time, a lot of these companies, you know, put a number of shops in an area because, from a business point of view, with these sort of fixed off betting terminals, those high value stakes where people are spending a lot of money, it made sense. The function of actual betting on a rate on a horse traditionally, you know, was a small amount of income in relation to that. I think that's the change, and certainly if you listen to the trade, that's the change that's driven the reduction in the number of shops. And I think it will be very much business driven as to whether we see a rise again in that. You know, my guess is probably not. I think, you know, that has sort of put that in, unless there's some other sort of, you know, sort of technology, etc. Online gaming seems to, you know, to be replacing a lot of this stuff, you know, as well, because people can do it in the comfort at home, in the secrecy and private of their own home. So that's the area I know the Gambling Commission are focusing a considerable amount of resources to, is looking at the online gambling.
Councillor Abbas, your question.
I don't really have any question, just a comment. Maybe it's a typographical mistake on page 9. You have given on description of borough in 2009, but in other report you have given figures from 2018.
Yeah, no, apologies for that. I did email Kenna earlier, and I should have mentioned it. For some reason, we sent the copy of the policy statement without actually reviewing the introduction description of the borough. We've used the same introduction and description that we've got in the licensing act. They were the same pretty much anyway. So it has been updated, and I can send that round to members for information, but it will go out to consultation with the updated profile of the borough.
Anyone else in the chamber? wish to ask a question? Okay, okay, I'll put it out. Councillor Redstall.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, thank you.
Okay. Thanks for the report, Paul. It's really it's very detailed. Could you just tell me a bit about the consultation? And I know it's going to be a more process, but going to get to really the people that matter on this one.
Yeah, I mean, the consultation process, I mean, within the document, it's a list of consultees, which is virtually the last page, 69. So we'll certainly, all responsible authorities for the Gambling Act, anyone that holds permits, etc. Obviously, we've elected members for the borough. Any premises that sells alcohol, etc. Anyone that holds a licence. And we'll consult with obviously religious groups, trade associations, voluntary groups, etc. We'll also advertise it on our website and through the consultation portal that Thurrock Council has. So hopefully that will get out to the wider community. But certainly anyone that has an interest, a link within the, or is a stakeholder within the area, we will write to directly. But I say it will also go out via public consultation via the portal and the website.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Redstall?
Can I just come back to that? Can I come
Certainly,
back on that,
follow-up question. You're very welcome.
Sorry, I'm getting intermittent things. I can't hear sometimes. Paul, just on that, will we send anything out to schools because of children being in? Is it something that we perhaps get out something to the schools just to let them know what's happening?
We wouldn't normally consult schools in relation to this policy. We haven't done previously. It's something I would have to think about. I mean, no particular reason why not. I would just need to sort of see, if members would like for us to consult with the schools, we can do that, I'm sure. Yeah, I can't see any reason why we can't, if members feel that they would like to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Are you satisfied with that, Councillor Evans? Have you another question?
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Fish, I understand you have a question, please.
Yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about influencing children with gambling and also problem gamblers. Does the licensing authority have any control over promotion of gambling? I'm thinking about when you watch a game of football on television, for instance, the adverts there for gambling are ubiquitous. And do we have any control over that in our own borough, how it's promoted?
No, that would be the responsibility of the Gambling Commission. We have responsibility for premises within our borough. The Gambling Commission have the responsibilities, the wider responsibilities for online gaming, advertising, etc. around that. So yeah, no, it's not something that we have any control over unless it's related to a gambling premises within our borough.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fish, do you have a follow-up question?
No, that's it. Thank you. Happy with that answer.
Thank you, Councillor. Any more questions in the chamber? Councillor Round.
Oh yeah, regarding the temporary event notices, just reading the guidelines of how they're given out, I'm just looking to see how they're checked, that they're being stuck to. There doesn't seem to be anything saying there that we're going to do spot checks on the event licenses. I know that they're limited to 500 people being there for the event.
I mean, that is in relation to the previous report and the previous policy. I'm happy to answer that question. I don't know whether you want to take it now or I can answer that afterwards, Chair.
We'll be answering that afterwards as it goes up.
Yeah, you can do, yeah.
Any more questions? No. Okay then, and more questions on our virtual team?
No.
Okay. What I'll do now is ask all the members in their agreement with the recommendations outlined in the report. I'll read them out because I think I should. 1.1, agree for the reviewed statement of principles to go out to the consultation. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
1.2, that
Agreed.
after consultation, relevant responses are reported to the licensing committee for consideration.
Agreed.
And 1.3, if no relevant responses are received during consultation, then for a recommendation to be made to the full council for the adoption of the statement of principles. Agreed? Okay.
Agreed.
Everyone in the virtual meeting, is that agreed as well?
Agreed.
Right, we'll take that as agreed. Councillor Abbas?
Sorry, just one clarification on 1.2 and 1.3. You mentioned like after consultation, relevant responses are reported to the licensing committee for consideration. So how come if there are no, sorry, I think, yeah.
We'd already agreed it anyway, but thank you anyway. That's great. Thank you, Paul. And does anyone have anything they wish to add? No? Well, I do. I realise that we agreed for the review of Licence Act 2003 Statement of Licensing without me reading out the recommendations, so I'll do it properly this time. We've already gone through this. If that's something. No, I don't have to? Okay, right. Thank you very much. If there's no other questions or queries, then that concludes our business at 19:52 this evening, and the meeting is now closed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.